Welcome to the next e-CENS video to reveal why switching from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4 requires time and resources. Hi, I'm Holger Tempel, partner at e-CENS as well as the founder and managing director of e-CENS in Germany. In the last video, I've talked about the differences in the report landscape when it comes to comparing Universal Analytics with GA4. In this video, I'm going to shed some light on the migration process when you want to switch from Universal Analytics to GA4. And exactly this process is probably the most underpinned when you want to or have to make the switch. Why is that? Well, it's because many users and sometimes agencies too think they could use an upgrade assistant or simply integrate new tracking code and that's it. And this is just not the case, neither of these. Quite the opposite. You need to take migration phases into account, and in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to tell you why. Here's a little bit of background information. Google introduced Firebase Analytics in May 2016 as the successor to app tracking with mobile SDK. At the end of July 2019, Google started the journey of creating a unified experience for both apps and web by merging Firebase Analytics and Google Analytics. And the outcome was the introduction of app and web properties in Google Analytics. In October 2020, Google made GA4 the new default property for tracking website visitors. And mid-March 2022, Google announced that Universal Analytics properties will stop processing data on July 1st, 2023. And this announcement was huge since it's the biggest thing to happen to analytics in nearly a decade. In addition, the following problems now come along with this latest announcement. The migration from Universal Analytics to GA4 needs to be done as quickly as possible to have accurate and reliable data available. You should at least be able to do a year-over-year comparison. Google will most likely delete the existing Universal Analytics properties after the deadline for migration, and therefore the data contained in these properties will also be deleted. This has also happened in the past, for example, when Google discontinued support for mobile SDK. GA4 is still under development and therefore is lacking dimensions, metrics, and features. Said that, the GA4 implementation needs to be reviewed, revised, and maintained frequently. And currently, GA4 offers less than 30 pre-built reports, which are more made for data scientists or digital analysts, but not for marketers. This needs to be compensated by creating ready-to-use reports in a separate app like, for instance, Google Data Studio. And last but not least, since the data model has changed completely as well as the UI of GA4, there's a need for training so that the marketers can reveal insights and then derive action upon these insights. All of these problems mentioned can be tackled by approaching them in the corresponding migration phase. So let's start with one of the more mandatory phases, which is the audit phase. Depending on the accuracy of your existing documentation and the scope of your Universal Analytics implementation, this phase may take a day or several weeks. When starting with this phase, you must consider to audit the following: the setup of Google Tag Manager if you use GTM to fire Universal Analytics tags. If you didn't make use of the GTM in the past and integrated Universal Analytics natively into your website source code, this phase is definitely mandatory, and you should also plan to migrate to GTM to fire GA4 tags. If you're not sure how to accomplish this, you can always turn to us at e-CENS. And as long as you've watched part 2 of this video series, you already know that views don't exist in GA4 anymore. Therefore, it's absolutely crucial to audit your Universal Analytics account structure with regards to its hierarchy so you're able to take care of this later when migrating to GA4. Also, it's important to have an overview of which user has access to which level of the structure and has been granted which permissions. Also, you should audit your current analytics configuration, and this is meant with regards to property and view configuration in Universal Analytics. At the property level, it is important to check, among other things, whether demographics, enhanced link attribution, or user metrics have been enabled in the property settings, whether Google products have been linked to Universal Analytics, whether audiences, custom dimensions, and custom metrics have been set up, or whether data imports have been created. On the view level, it is important to know, among other things, whether goals, content groups, filters, channel groupings, or calculated metrics have been created or modified. To document all of this extensively is a must. Last but not least, and of course only if applicable, you need to audit your Firebase console with regards to tracking the use of your app or apps. This brings us to the next phase in the migration process, which is the integration planning. And this phase will most likely consume the most of the time in the migration process and will last up to 8 weeks or even longer. This is due to the fact that several steps need to be taken, which are a clear definition of stakeholders who will be part of the project and who are also eligible to make decisions, the definition of the measurement plan, which will outline and document the following topics: business objectives, identified strategies and tactics, KPIs, quality metrics and helper metrics, decision on data segmentation, defined targets for the KPIs, and also if data privacy regulations apply and how they will impact the data collection. Another step in the integration planning is the documentation of the technical conditions, which will take care of understanding the realities, like for instance the inventory of websites and apps as well as corresponding sitemaps, a complete listing of all marketing activities, online and offline, and the technical characteristics to determine whether all required data can be collected with the technologies used. The last step in the integration planning is to create the implementation plan, which will be the outcome of the previous steps. And this will cover a list of the missing features in GA4 and the impact on your implementation, a list of the limitations in GA4 which might impact your implementation or your business, and a tag implementation plan which outlines which tag needs to be created and when it is to be fired. Once you're done with the integration planning, you can proceed to the next phase, which is all about strategy. With a duration of 4 or more weeks, this phase is less time consuming compared to the integration planning, but also requires people to be focused on the project. So let's see what needs to be taken care of here. According to the tag implementation plan from the integration planning phase, and most likely due to time constraints, you now need to prioritize which tag needs to be implemented first and which can be postponed for a later implementation. Next is to come up with solutions for migrating from Universal Analytics to GA4 with regards to custom definitions like custom metrics and custom dimensions, filters to alter incoming traffic, goals which need to be translated to conversions, content groups as well as channel groupings, and enhanced e-commerce. The outcome then should be 2 checklists which cover what needs to be done. The first one would be a GA4 setup checklist, and the second one would be a migration checklist. And last but not least, you should also decide what should happen to your existing Universal Analytics data. Like mentioned before, chances are high that Universal Analytics properties might get deleted after some months when Universal Analytics has been set end of life. Also, Google does not provide you with the possibility to simply transfer your existing data from Universal Analytics to GA4. Said that, data export might also be a topic to think about. Either you export the data to Google BigQuery if possible, or you need to find some other solution, like for instance importing the data from Universal Analytics into another web analytics solution. And after you have successfully taken care of this phase, it's time to start with the implementation. So the implementation phase will also not be too time consuming, but you should calculate with up to 4 or even more weeks depending on the scope of your plans and the amount of work to be done. Said that, you will have to take care of implementation and configuration, which means to implement high priority tracking according to your tag implementation plan and to configure GA4 according to the GA4 setup checklist. Next is to define the events and parameters which you want to use to collect data. So make use of automated, recommended, or custom events in conjunction with built-in recommended or custom parameters. And every time you make use of custom parameters, you will most likely need to register a GA4 specific element like custom dimension or custom metric, and also if you want to define a specific event as a conversion event. Once done with this, quality assurance is mandatory to check the accuracy of data being collected and if the desired outcomes are met. And the next phase in the migration process is called integration and must not be mixed up with the previous phase. Even though it might be implied that both could mean the same, this phase takes care of the integration of GA4 with other Google products. At the time of recording this video, GA4 can be integrated with Google Search Console, other Google advertising products like Google Ads, Ad Manager, DV360, and Search Ads 360, or the Google Merchant Center, as well as BigQuery. In addition, you might be interested to also integrate GA4 with Google Optimize. And if you now tend to think, perfect, we're done with the migration, then you're wrong. Why? Because at the time of recording this video, only a few reports are available in GA4. If you want to know more about this, just watch my previous video, which is about comparing the report landscape. And therefore, you need more or less to compensate the lack of missing reports by creating additional reports in GA4. This can be done by copying and modifying existing reports and using exploration in the Explore section of GA4. On the other hand, you could also use Google Data Studio to create beautiful and meaningful reports by connecting GA4 directly. Alternatively, you can also connect Google Data Studio to BigQuery once you've exported your GA4 data there. And the last phase in the migration process, which is optional but highly recommended, is called training. This phase can last from some days up to several weeks, depending on how many people need to be trained, what their skill level is, etc. But basically, your people should attend a generic training on GA4, which covers things like getting familiar with the new UI and the terminology regarding new dimensions and metrics, or how to implement campaign tracking and attribute the credit to channels, or the differences between standard reports, customized reports and explorations, or how to configure GA4 to your needs, and much, much more. Additionally, some people should also be trained on more specific topics for GA4, like for instance, marketers should know how to do their day-to-day evaluations, and data scientists could be trained to adapt to the new data model. And once you're done with the last phase of the migration process, no matter if it's training or report, you'll have to loop back to the implementation phase to take care of the tracking with lower priority. If this can be done in one go, perfect. Otherwise, you simply go through the phase again. And once you've implemented all of the tracking, it's time to maintain and refine the integration planning. And this is due to the fact that your business requirements and your technical environment can change over time. Without maintaining your plan, your data won't keep pace with your reporting needs. I hope this video has shed some light on the complexity of the process when it comes to migrating from Universal Analytics to GA4. And always keep in mind, experience cannot be learned, it must be gathered. Therefore, rely on the expert's experience only.